All right, everybody. Order. Sorry, that was crazy. My name is Dominic Ledesma. A lot of you are familiar faces. I'm the president here at the PSSA. Today we're going to be having a meeting on crisis management. Kind of ironic with the series of events that have played over the past couple of weeks in Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, and Tennessee. This actually means a lot to me. My family's from Puerto Rico. So Hurricanes Maria, Harvey, and Irma, and pretty much every hurricane season devastate my island. So we can feel free to talk about whatever we'd like. With that being said, I'm about to turn over the floor to Dr. Cavalli so he can make some opening announcements. But throughout the meeting, I'm going to be handing out these flyers. This is a South Georgia Hurricane Helene Disaster Relief Fund. I know it's a mouthful, but it's an initiative started by SGA, and the PSSA is involved. We have just officially launched it today. There's donation boxes all across campus at 5 different locations, and we hope to have more soon. Also in the downtown area for Gold Rush this weekend. Go support your local communities. Give what you can, and if you can't give, we'll take your thoughts and prayers as well. So with that being said, Dr. Cavalli.
Okay. For those of you who weren't expecting this to happen, who might have just been in the lobby because it's a lobby, we do this every week at noon, and you are welcome to join us. I will be passing around an attendance sheet in a few minutes, and this will verify your attendance. For those of you who have been here before, you know the deal. If you put a faculty name next to your name, we will contact that faculty member. We can't guarantee they'll do anything about it, but if you want to bug them for extra credit, we will verify your attendance. We are also live streaming over YouTube. This is an open discussion. Feel free to jump in and talk about the topic this week whenever you feel like it. So, go ahead.
So I want to start this off by, because we are the Political Science Student Association, I get that this is going to get political in nature. I just want to start by commending our event coordinator and our voting guide publisher. If you guys haven't seen, it's going to be printed out on all 5 campuses this year. But earlier this semester, he said something that stuck with me that I can't get out of my head, and it's to never waste a crisis. This is a presidential election year, and coincidentally, hurricane season happens right before an election. Now, in times past, we've had October surprises of all different kinds. An October surprise being something that shakes up the election right before it happens. And in my personal opinion, I don't think that we've really had one this year. However, with the hurricane happening, we can sort of see political opponents capitalizing on this as their October surprise. And so I wanted to see if any of you guys thought anything in particular about what happened in South Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee.
I'll go first.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so I think the biggest surprise of this hurricane season, also election year, is let's just say the issues that have arisen from the former president's comments on the hurricane and FEMA. We have seen a lot of active disinformation being spread around these areas that have been affected by the hurricane, and it has actually had an effect on places like Asheville, Valdosta, etc., in terms of people getting access to care. And I see this as a really big issue in how we see the rise of politicians actively using disinformation to bolster themselves. And yeah, I think it's just a really big issue right now. I think nobody really talks about it, but I definitely noticed it, and yeah.
I mean, like, to your point, I mean, like, FEMA members are getting death threats now.
Yeah.
Because of, like, conspiracism, and I mean, you know, also related to the hurricane, you know, like, you know, the next county over, Marjorie Taylor Greene is, you know, posting about, we all know they can control the weather, it's time to stop acting like they can't, you know what I mean? So, I mean, and also, furthermore, I mean, and this is a crisis, right, obviously. This would be when, the one time, you know, even if you are a small government person, this would be the one time where it's like, okay, maybe the government should actually do something. But Mike Johnson very conveniently decided actually, just kidding. We're not gonna actually, we're not gonna hold another. We're not gonna, meet again until after the election. So, he's.
Mike Johnson's the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Yeah.
And I mean, the main reason that you want to do this is that you want to handicap the Biden response as much as possible to make him look bad, for the election.
I do want to point out, though, that the Florida senator who is seeking re-election in Florida voted against the FEMA bill that was passed $20 billion, and now is requesting aid after Hurricane Milton. So yeah, it's an issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure which senator you're referring to. I have seen a lot of information coming out from Senator Rick Scott of Florida.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if that's who you're talking about. He actually, so I've been following the congressional hearings about what's happening with this hurricane. He actually did request additional funding from FEMA prior to Hurricanes Helena and Milton hitting the United States. And I wanted to ask you too, do you think it's, at this point, yes, conspiracy theories have no room in a humanitarian relief effort. In my opinion, I don't think it's a political game. I think people's lives are actually being affected by this. But do you think it's entirely misinformation, or do you think it's a lack of information? Because the point that you brought up about there being a $20 billion cap with FEMA, and the point that you brought up about death threats to FEMA workers, I don't think that a lot of people realize that FEMA has a directive that's established by Congress earlier this year, actually, where they provided them with all of this donation or this relief money, but they have to utilize it in specific ways that are outlined by Congress. They do have agendas, and that is public information online that only takes a Google search to figure out. And so when it comes to humanitarian aid, FEMA's mostly responsible for infrastructure. They're responsible for making sure that the interstate is cleaned up, the trees are off the road. They're helping individual families that apply for FEMA relief. Like, there's multiple options in which FEMA can help, but primarily the responsibility is to make sure that the infrastructure grid, like power lines, electricity, satellite, is functioning properly. It's not necessarily to give people aid in per se. So I just wanted to...
Well, I want to actually, on FEMA's website, about the services they provide, they say for mass care and emergency assistance, they do sheltering, they do feeding, distribution of emergency supplies, support of owners and their household pets, service and assistant animals, support for adults and children with disabilities and other occupational needs, mass evacuation support, reunification of adults and children. So I think FEMA, right, is basically like, they're the leader. They're the ones that they're like the organizers, they're the experts that step up and coordinate all the resources, the aid organizations, even the National Guard. They coordinate everything. They're like the central, they're the people that announce that there's an emergency, and then they're the people that lead during the recovery of the emergency. And then they're also the people who, after it's all said and done, because you can also apply for FEMA, like to get money to like rebuild, like help rebuild your house and stuff. So I mean, they're basically the people that announce it, manage it, and then end it, basically. Like, so they're the main like organization that if you were gonna approve extra money to someone to make this go away, you would give it to FEMA.
Right. I think that's a great point that you just brought up, and you see how fast it was for you to find that information online. And so I think that the leadership organization aspect is the predominant factor that's playing into this. There's not just FEMA who's responsible for giving these aids. The American Red Cross Association, United Way, and other local nonprofit organizations, churches, whoever you want to consider. They're the ones actually out on the ground in these local communities providing the aid through FEMA. FEMA's providing them the money and the monetary funds to be able to organize. But from my personal experiences, this is not just an opinion, but even seeing FEMA's response in Puerto Rico, they can only organize to a certain extent. And yes, I 100% agree that we shouldn't be nitpicking, not nitpicking necessarily, we shouldn't just, congressmen in specific, shouldn't just be focused on how can we make this a political gain for my party. I think that this is something that they could probably reach across the aisle for, and it would help both parties in this instance. So I actually love that you were able to just Google that and look it up. I think that a lot of people could serve themselves better by just researching a little bit. It doesn't take much effort, but that's the exact point that I'm making. Is and so thank you, Tyler. Do you guys, or do you think that FEMA should be doing more or less with what they have, and how do you guys feel about this? Everybody can participate, by the way. This isn't just
I want to make mention of something that I have brought up before over the years, actually, and I just want to see if this fits into our conversation. And that is that I have always said that we are very good people in the moment, but we are very bad at planning ahead, and we are very bad at following up. What do you all think about that?
Well, honestly, I think that's like basically, that is essentially what happened with COVID. I mean, Congress basically doesn't do anything most of the time, right? But then, you know, when COVID, you know, happened, it was such a, like, it was basically such a calamity that, like, if the government didn't, like, get its shit together, essentially, and, like, do something about it, it would be, like, horrific, and, like, no one would benefit at all. So, that, you know, they basically immediately passed, like, $1 trillion, like, stimulus package for the economy, like, you know, even though they basically didn't do anything, but, like, so, like, when, you know, something that is so unbelievably bad, like, hits the America, it's the one time that Congress can actually see that there isn't time for doing all this, like, you know, dumb, like, partisan stuff. But, you know, that COVID also could have been mitigated, right? It wouldn't have been nearly as bad if we had just better healthcare infrastructure just prior to it. I mean, obviously it's unprecedented, you know, like, we knew that we were going to need like 1 million ventilators and all that, but if there was already like a pre-established relationship with the government, you know, because you know, our healthcare system's private, they don't usually prepare for crises because, you know, keeping all that extra stock on like hand is not good for business. You know, you want to run, you know, you're trying to make profit, so you don't want to like stock up for something that might not even happen. But, you know, the government, if the government, you know, actively invested in healthcare, we would have been better prepared. And maybe we wouldn't even have to have done like $1 trillion stimulus. You know, probably could have saved us money technically if we were, you know, better prepared.
Okay, go ahead.
Being from Florida and seeing, I might not agree with DeSantis on everything, but he really knows how to prepare for a hurricane. I do agree that government preparation for a hurricane, a pandemic, but at the same time, these are natural, unpredictable disasters. Like, I mean, everybody would love to just sit here and, you know, blame the government after something goes wrong and they didn't prepare enough for it. I think that's really easy to do. But I don't know, as far as like the whole, I guess DeSantis specifically, like where this is getting political, because I think FEMA has become just kind of like a trigger word, and I honestly don't know enough to speak on it, so I won't. But I do think it is interesting that both Trump and Biden during their presidencies have worked, and I just use Florida as an example because I know it well, and DeSantis spoke about it. But he's worked very well with Trump and Biden in hurricane relief, hurricane preparation, all the above. And I do think it's weird that now Harris tried to kind of like implement herself, and I understand the election is coming up and that most likely has something to do with it. So overall, weird that these issues are over-politicized, but yeah.
Over-politicized is a good way to frame it. Florida, you can commend the Biden administration for their response and their preparation for Hurricane Milton. Genuinely, DeSantis had a different strategy, in my opinion, in Hurricane Milton by forcibly creating 4 to 5 different zones of impact, and the D zones being the most severe, closer to the Tampa Bay area, requiring businesses to shut down because, come on, we all have seen those Florida Man articles, like they don't really care about hurricanes. So requiring businesses to shut down, establishing a curfew from 8 p.m. to 10 a.m., contacting FEMA and the Biden administration ahead of time and trying to prevent mass calamity was something that I can't commend Florida for, as well as their restoration efforts. It's the largest lineman movement recent history, over 60,000 linemen have been sent to Florida for restoration of electricity, power grids, and to try to clean up any flood areas. I personally know this because I was on the phone with my buddy who lives in Lakeland, which is not an evacuation zone, but it's pretty close to the Tampa Bay. And we stayed on the phone playing video games all night until he told me, hey dude, my power just went out. And then his phone died. And then I didn't hear from him for 4 days. And then he just recently got power back, and I was the first person that he called, and he's like, yeah, honestly, I wasn't expecting to hear from you for like 2 weeks. So to see him have electricity returned back in just 4 days, that's something commendable. But to further Dr. Cavalli's point, that seems like an in a moment thing. And to agree with you, it is kind of something that's unpredictable, but I can only help but think about COVID as well. And the Obama-Biden administration created a epidemic strategy actually for if there were some sort of virus that were to spread and reach the United States. And Trump his administration kind of just threw it out the window. But then we have Operation Warp Speed, which is like one of the biggest points Republicans want to bring up when it comes to COVID response. So it's like, yeah, we could have prepared a lot better for it, and the Trump administration tried to save face by pushing out vaccines at the end of his administration.
Well, okay, so I mean, there's two things I want to say, right? There's like the whole thing, just like, about the warp speed thing. I mean, I mean, it is a good thing, right? But I imagine most governments would have invested that much in trying to get a vaccine out to open the economy. But it's still a good thing. I'm not going to take that away. But I guess it is a little ironic because like the Republican base hates vaccines. So specifically Trump's like cohort. You know what I mean? He got booed for like saying that he was like he likes bragging about things. So he liked to brag about how to make the vaccine basically, and he got booed by his own crowd because like they're like anti-vaccine and all like that. But the main thing is they're not. I wouldn't say hurricanes are entirely unpredictable in the sense that we have a scientific phenomenon that explains weather patterns getting like just worse, over time, and that is a political issue. That is a Republicans don't, typically. I mean, there are members of the Republican Party that just basically just straight up deny it, and then there are ones that are like, oh, it's not a problem, or then there are ones that basically, I don't know, like say like, hey youth, we care about this, and then like they don't do anything about it. But like, the thing about climate change is that it's going to keep making this worse and worse. So I mean, like for like Florida's sake, I mean, if you look at like the insurance rates. What?
No, I'm just. You want to talk next?
Oh, okay.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
okay. Anyways, I was just saying, like, if you look at the insurance rates for Florida, right? Insurance companies are like jacking up people's like flood insurance because they understand the scientific fact that it's going to get worse. So like they know that like, hey, like if I'm playing like the Facebook gambling game that is insurance, right? They know that like Florida flooding wise is getting worse and worse, so they're jacking up people's rates. And honestly, it's becoming even more and more expensive to just live on the coast. So I mean, I wouldn't say, and it's just one of these things where like if we took more better climate action, we could stop the escalation of like the severity of these events. You're not going to get more; you're just going to get worse of what you do get. You know what I mean? Like you'll get Hurricane Milton surging like right before it like hits, and you'll get Hurricane Helene also surging right before it hits. I mean, I think Milton was like broke a record for like how quickly it like became like just a Category 5. So I mean, these things, there is an explanation. It's not like, oh, how could this have happened? You know what I mean? Like, we know why things are getting worse, what I mean? And that is a political issue, and it goes back to Kalai's point of like doing something before it gets to that point, but and then like actually doing like disaster mitigation when it doesn't really happen.
Anita, remember to speak up because we don't have the microphone plugged in.
frustrated. They don't understand that misinformation happens. It's a horrible game of telephone. And you have people in these areas that have no electricity. They can't check the internet. They can't really do phone calls easily. It's the only information they're getting is by email. And there's a lot of just anger between both parties because they're not understanding each other. It's just really sad to see how that misinformation is spreading. And then I also had like a note from like way back it's a lighter note, but it had to do with like Florida. Have you guys seen the Waffle House Index? It's how bad the storm's gonna be is based on how many Waffle Houses close in the area. Like that's how you know, like it's really bad.
Yeah, it was like the latest one was, you know, like
It was like
big
all no
Waffle Houses done.
Yeah, that's a Waffle House.
They were all closed.
Why don't you go and then we'll go back to you.
I guess going back to your point about like preparing and everything, like because the government, you know, they do as best as they can as like preparing wise because, you know, like for a hurricane, if you like prepare so much for it and then let's just say it just dies down and nothing happens and you make businesses closed and, you know, those people are losing out on that, you know, revenue that they could be making that day or those couple of days that they, you know, tell you that you need to close down and evacuate and then, you know, people just can't afford to do that. Like small businesses, they just can't afford to close down and evacuate. Like, you know, they have a business to be running and this like, you know, over preparing could actually hurt them. But then on top of that, like under preparing can also hurt a lot more as well. So it's just kind of like the government, I feel like is trying to do as best as they can. I don't think that we should really be blaming them. Just, you know, really prepare as much as we can for these hurricanes. Like, you know, Hurricane Lee, we didn't expect that to hit the Carolinas as hard as it did, and it did. So we're trying our best to work on it.
Yeah, just pretty much agreeing with both of y'all. Because like we can, you know, predict that a storm is coming, but to predict the flooding and landslides, mudslides, death toll, just everything that happened, especially in western North Carolina, it's just it's difficult to prepare. And like I've always said to like my friends, because I'm used to like a hurricane, like it's gonna, you know, whatever, like yeah. But it's always like over preparing. My family has small businesses. It's always about over preparing every sandbag you can get, and it might sound little, but in the end, like over preparing is the best.
Go ahead.
I was like, I had heard this point, like around when the flooding was, you know, had just happened pretty much. And it was essentially like up in like the mountainous Carolinas, kind of eastern Tennessee region, where it was really bad. I heard it was probably a lot worse because a lot of the infrastructure was not up to code. It was like a lot of like the water systems, the sewage, the electricity, a lot of it was not up to date and really needed like a good rework. And it was probably a lot of stuff was probably a lot worse than it could have been because there just wasn't a lot that like the Appalachians are the poorest region of America, and as it shows in their infrastructure, they need money to get it rebuilt and refurbished when it's, you know, old. And this just kind of now they don't even have their old stuff. It's all gone because the old stuff was not up to code.
To that exact point that you're making, and to further your point, North Carolina and Tennessee were not expecting to get as hard as, let's say, Georgia, Florida were expecting to get hit. So there was, to an extent, of lack of preparedness. Nobody would have thought that a mountainous area would have gotten flooded.
Yeah.
But this is something that I don't think that a lot of mainstream media news sources are talking about, particularly not just North Carolina, Tennessee. That's where the majority of the attention is right now. But from what I've learned about the South Georgia area, and that's what like our Hurricane Relief Fund is orienting our gear to, our resources to. I've reached out to students in Valdosta State. I've reached out to their governmental relations directors, and students only just got back to campus today. This week is their homecoming week, and they just can't not have a homecoming. But I've been let know by faculty that they essentially don't have a campus right now. A lot of people aren't talking about Augusta State University, whose student body that lives on campus has had to be relocated to a new university school system in Georgia. when it is word of mouth, it becomes a lot more difficult to coordinate some sort of relief effort. But that's because these areas are mostly rural. It's mostly close-knit communities that talk to each other and help each other out. And so that's why I see we can play our part as a fellow Georgians to help out our local communities, because right now with an election coming up, they're going to want to politicize this issue, and that's not necessarily what we're here to do. As a Political Science Student Association, we're a nonpartisan group. So that's one huge point that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, is that these communities weren't expecting to get as hard. I don't know if y'all seen some of the flooding that's happened in just the Buckhead, like New Paces Ferry Road, 23 feet. The Chattahoochee River, usually by this, there's a restaurant called Canoe. It's a really well-known restaurant in the Atlanta area. It's right next to the river, and the river usually gets about 3 feet high. After Hurricane Helena, it reached 28 feet. It increased by 25 feet. The entire building was submerged. I'm sure they had flood insurance because they're already right next to a river, and so they probably accounted for, like, might be a rainy day one day. But I don't think a lot of people were expecting for their entire building to be completely submerged underwater.
And also to your point about the infrastructure there, the poverty in Appalachia goes back like so far. And I remember a professor here telling me about Roosevelt's New Deal and how he really tried to get funds allocated to that area because they were already poor, and then they're hit with the Great Depression in the 30s. It's just how can you even recover? And he mentioned that while a lot of money was allocated to those areas to build stuff like roads, dams, really important infrastructure, not that from the 30s they would have held up until now, but just the idea that the money that is being allocated there is not going where it's supposed to. What my professor kind of chopped it up to be was just government corruption in a way of like individual local leaders of that area. It'd be definitely interesting to do some more research and see how much that impacted the effects of the hurricane.
Yeah, I've not done a lot of research in Appalachia. I pretty much just know it's the poorest region of America, and it has been for pretty much our entire history. And it's just, no one's done a lot to fix it.
Well, I mean, the big thing is, right, I mean, the last time the government actually, tried was the New Deal, this is unpreparedness and, out of dateness of our, infrastructure, especially our, electricity, we basically built that during the Rural Electrification, Act, right? That happened, and then basically we never touched the grid since. Basically, we just kind of maintained this, constantly aging and decaying electrical infrastructure, and and this kind of goes with his point of being prepared. I mean, since the weather is going to get worse, right? I mean, you've seen in Miami where they've been basically raising the city up essentially, where they're investing all this money and time and effort to future-proof the city against rising sea levels, and that's gonna have to go. You're gonna have to do that with basically more and more coastal cities and states, and that's gonna require a lot of government investment. There's gonna be, if you want these places to be secured against future, worse storm events, the government is going to have to step up and actually spend money. And unfortunately, we don't like spending money from the government, but it's the only way, if you want Appalachia to come back, join the 21st century, in terms of economic prosperity and, having it's really bad. Doctors Without Borders goes there sometimes, and there's international dentists that go there and do work, which is, in the richest country in the world, that's pretty humiliating and embarrassing that our country can't provide for our citizens like that. But, at the end of the day, it is going to require government action. The government's the only, interest that can go in there and actually, invest, and not expect a return on investment necessarily, which is why corporations usually dodge out of rural areas.
That's exactly right, and that's why the Appalachian region lagged behind for forever, basically, until the 1930s, until these projects because it was not conducive for any traditional power company or infrastructure company to go in there. And so into the 1930s, we had people just not too far north of here living in essentially 19th century conditions without any electricity at all, because it just was, and without proper other types of proper infrastructure dealing with water and dealing with roads and highways and access, et cetera, because it just wasn't worth it. The only one that could really step in and develop the area was the federal government. Right? Anita, you wanted to go again?
Yeah, I definitely saw a lot of this over time. Just the government definitely cares about large populations, and the problem with Appalachia is a lot of small rural areas. And at least going back to like 30s and stuff, I know a lot of the issues came from the mining and just the mining industry. That a lot of the Appalachian mining towns, like alpha mining and the people that are running the mining operations, do not care about the people out here. And that caused a lot of the issues that persisted later into time. And the electrical grid, just infrastructure in general, has been bad. Even in like more populated areas like here, I've seen it get better over time. But I remember going up the mountain as a kid, and you just slowly see when you're going to rural areas, like the guard railings, they go from metal, wood, just wood, nothing. And then like electrical is like they try and catch up what they can, but like the grid that my road's on, that I grew up on, it's back in the woods, and they added in more housing. Well, the electrical grid wasn't ready for the housing. The box exploded 3 times, and they finally replaced the box. And that's not entirely on our electrical company. It's just that our infrastructure isn't ready to do like big changes. Like they don't have the funding for that, so they just fix what they can. And that's just all across the Appalachians. I grew up in the South Appalachia, but most of my family's from North Appalachia. It's about the same. It's just a lot of consistent issues, and people don't even have the city water. They don't know well. It's like different. It's just the drastic change between here and the city, and funding is still big. It's hard to get things done.
Just very quickly before you go, point of privilege. One of the places where hopefully we will see some planning, and you've seen a few places act, but one of the next big things that we're going to have to deal with is water. And I don't mean the rising seawater. That's enough of a problem. I'm talking about getting water to people, getting clean water to people. These huge water pipes in many areas of the country are century old. That's what, I don't know if you guys were around here a year or two ago, but that's what they were doing out around the square. They had a lot of the area closed off because they were relaying water pipes that were decades, again, if not close to a century old. New York City has these huge delivery pipes. I mean, that you could build a house inside one and have plenty of room in there. There's gigantic water pipes that bring water from reservoirs in upstate New York down to New York City. And these things were over a century old. And they had to, in New York City, in Manhattan, they had to build a whole new pipe around an existing one. They had to build a whole new thing completely separately because they were afraid that if they shut off that water pipe, they wouldn't be able to turn it on again. And you're talking about 2, 3, 4 million residents in Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens, because these things are so old. So that's something we have to look out for. If we can plan ahead, that's something we have to look out for in the future. And I've seen some communities do it. New York is finally starting to do it. Again, they did it around here. Hopefully other places will do it, but that's something that was a big thing in terms of development a century ago, but really needs to be addressed now. Anita, we'll go back to you, and then we'll go over to you, and then we'll go.
Just to clarify what you're talking about, that's one really, really nice thing that I've seen
And the thing is, a lot of that is very much out of sight, out of mind, literally, because we don't tend to think about this, but down below us here is not just earth. There's a whole, that's what we mean by infrastructure. There are these gigantic plumbing pipes, there are gigantic tubes, and there are, electricity wiring. And there are all sorts of facilities underneath us. If you live in an urban area, if you live in a suburban area, again, what's underneath is it's not just ground, there's a whole infrastructure underneath. Even a good portion of many rural areas to bring water and electricity and other things. There's all of this. And it tends to be out of sight, out of mind. And so maybe that's why we wait way too long, because the only time you really think about it is when something goes wrong and you're stuck without water for days because a water main bursts and your local street is flooded, but you have no water at all in your home, and that's when we act. So you wanted to think something up?
Yeah, on the topic of water, we do have a serious issue impacting the southwest of the U.S., and that is droughts and water scarcity. And uniquely enough, it is partially due to climate change, but also a real big issue, speaking of crisis management, is corporations. The reason why the Southwest is starting to experience water droughts and water scarcity is because of these corporations, mainly with agriculture, with grazing and just farming in general. We're using gallons of water, millions of gallons of water, probably every year, probably more than that, feeding these systems of sort of agriculture that are not going to be self-sustainable. I believe in there's an area, I think, in the sort of Great Plains area of a groundwater basin, basically, and it's starting to run out because these farming practices are unsustainable. And once the water is gone, well, that's really the crisis.
You like almonds? Look up how much water it takes to grow almonds.
It is
You're right.
an issue that we're starting to sort of see now. And also, there's been some sort of issues with how water is managed by these corporations. Sometimes it's shipped out. I want to say that there was a company, I think, owned by the Middle East who was taking groundwater from the U.S. and shipping it back to the Middle East. I can't quite remember that, but yeah, like this is a crisis that we're seeing that's man-made, and no one's really talking about it, and no one's really talking about the lack of oversight that the government should be held accountable for.
Yeah, what's the, again, this is something else you can look up. What's the river in California that runs down into Baja California? Or that used, I don't think so, but that used to run into Baja California. There's a river down there that has been so diverted for agriculture that it no longer reaches its natural outlet. It just disappears completely. I don't remember the name of the river. Do you have it?
It's Google Maps here.
May not be out there anymore.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. It's a river that used to run.
Well, one of the problems with the Southeast as well is that
It might be the California
they have,
River. I'm not sure.
They have bad like government policy as well for like they basically have like a use it or lose it policy for water rights. So like if you don't meet if you're not using this much water quota wise, they cut your water. So farmers are incentivized to farm really water intensive crops in the desert.
Like almonds.
Which makes it way worse.
Yeah, go ahead.
Some of the points that I've heard brought up so far are surrounding the federal government's responses, federal government's, preparation, as well as corporate interests and also climate change. But after hearing Anita and Dr. Cavalli talking about how they're working hard in Lumpkin County to try to update some of their systems, I wonder to what extent is it the responsibility of the states themselves and local government to keep these things updated? And this is a genuine question that I'm asking. This isn't I know the answer. Because every state is going to have its own unique individual problems. With 50 states and over 5 territories and provinces, the United States of America is a large country with diverse environments, and so I just wonder, like, is there even a path to, having a federal emergency management agency when we also have we have a GEMA here in Georgia, if y'all didn't know. Like, we have a Georgia emergency management agency. And so I wonder, to what extent is the responsibility of our legislature or local governments to start enacting bills or legislation, proposing amendments, trying to get funding redirected, like this tourist tax. Like, I didn't know Lumpkin County had a tourist tax. Granted, I'm only 22. I don't know many things, but do you have anything to suggest?
I was gonna say, like, it's mostly the state and locals' responsibility for like infrastructure and stuff. Like disaster relief, yeah, call in like the federal government, but it's like a lot of the times, poor infrastructure is usually just down to local, like, either corruption or competence, or they are just not making any money because of other factors.
I want to wrap up a little bit early, if we could, but let you guys finish up what you were going to say.
I mean, just really quickly, like, especially in terms of, like, the Colorado River drying up, because, like, that's mainly, states have a bit of a problem where, because, you have, 50-state situation, there's, states are always racing to the bottom, basically selling out their own states as much as humanly possible to, get corporations to go to their state instead of, the next state over, right? So, you can't really trust the states necessarily to do this, right? I think in terms of, trying to get, resource management, you have to kind of take a look at, the national view, because states are simply too, they're too busy competing with one another to ever, I don't know, unite, because the Colorado River Compact between all the states is, massively unrealistic, and they're all,
It might be the Colorado River that I was thinking of. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but they're all taking too much. So, the states have proven that they can't handle this situation. So, it's clear, the federal government would need to, bird's eye view step in and give them, the realistic, hey, you can't take this much water.
Low taxes is attractive, but it means you don't have money to do things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also sometimes for infrastructure and stuff, I think it's focused on local governments implementing it, but they're partnering with people from this higher state governments and who are getting the funding from state and federal. So for here, I know our county coach had a partnership with Camp to bring out better internet to the mountain area, and that was something that they worked together with, and they used some leverage with higher government to try to get something like that to happen. So just people working
Okay, last word, and then there's
Just
something I want to mention about next week.
Just a thought to try to wrap things up, and also great points, everybody. Dr. Gamal is going to talk about next week, but I think it's ironic that we brought up the idea of what states can do. And 2 weeks from now, we're going to be having a topic on prohibition laws. And so I hope you guys show up to that one, because you might be interested to see what we talk about. But,
Modern day prohibition laws. We're not talking about alcohol.
yeah.
Right.
Well, when it came to the infrastructure thing, it couldn't help but remind me of the United States Federal Highway Act, which is what helps us get infrastructure money per state. And that's based on what the legal drinking age is in each state. If it's not 21, then we don't really get as much federal money as possible to fix what's underneath our feet. But that's why it was coincidental. I was like, oh, that might be a topic that comes up in the future.
Yeah, Louisiana was a long time holdout to that, but even they gave in eventually. Yeah, so next week we're going to have a special Crossroads right here. It is, we're going to talk about U.S. politics and diplomacy, and from a literally international perspective, we are going to have a special set of guests. Members of the German embassy are coming from North Carolina. They are headed to Atlanta, and they have actually requested to stop here and talk to us. And so we've invited them to attend our Crossroads, where we will talk about U.S. politics, but in addition, you will be able to ask about diplomatic or international opportunities as well, or at least I hope you'll be able to do that. So bring a lot of friends. This will be a special Crossroads with special diplomatic guests from Germany, did you want to add one?
Yeah, I'm really excited for next week's first international CrossRoads. It's kind of what we're trying to excite people about. But also tonight on the drill field, starting at 5 o'clock, we're having fright fights. So UNG PSSA is going to be debating sort of against the speech and debate team here on the Dahlonega campus, right on the drill field. It's a Halloween event, so you can dress up as whoever you'd like. We have Hi My Name Is stickers, so if you don't have a costume, you can just write a name on there, and that counts for me. But we would love a huge turnout. We're gonna have Nigel, or not, we're trying to have Nigel out there. We're gonna do a rally per se, and march down to the to the stadium in support of SGA for Spirit Night and UNG Men's Athletics soccer team. So this is a pretty big event that we're trying to coordinate. If you guys are here now, I'm assuming you'll be here later. So please try to show some support, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Have a good rest of your day.
Okay.
I